Good morning and welcome to Paint by Numbers. This is our first Paint by Numbers and hopefully a series of meetings where we discuss informational things, where we first briefly look at the county's current financial picture, and then we use numbers to help us tell an aspect of the county story. I'd like to thank Commission for sponsoring this informational series and for allowing the Budget Office to put together this information. So to get right into it and look at our numbers, the Budget Office has developed a new model where our current year budget to date is based on the actual experience of the previous year. So as in this case, you can see the blue revenue line from 2024 is setting the base for the black budget to date line for 2025. So we use the actual 2024 experience and apply it against the overall budget figure for each account, and we add that up. So to just look at May, when we look at revenues, of course, this chart goes from negative $1 million all the way up to $93 million. So even a small amount of space can end up being a large number. When we look at this, revenues are behind budget. This gold line is the actual line, and it's below the budget to date line in May by $3,129,000. This is mainly because our revenues are net of transfers. And in transfers, we have negative $1,443,000, where $1,176,000 of this is representing opioid funds that were moved out of general revenue to their own separate fund. And of course, we did not budget for this, and so it's not reflected in the budget, and we see this difference. In addition, there's about $267,000 more in transfer money that is being transferred out quicker this year than what happened in 2024. In 2024, there was an adjustment late in the year to where our transfers were increased. And besides that, we have sales tax, which is about $670,000 down. However, we've seen that when the June sales tax comes in, that a lot of that deficit will be made up. And then we also have Department of Corrections boarding, which is about $485,000 behind budget to date, which of course is determined by the pace of receipts that happened in 2024. And then our investment interest is another $353,000 behind budget to date. Last year, 2024, was a little bit unusual, where we had 62% of our volume of interest on investments come in January. So that was a rather heavy month. And then when we look at expenditures, you can see the 2024 line here, and then a higher budgeted expenditures in 2025, creating this green line. And when we look at March and April, you can see that our actual expenditures were less than budget. But by the time we've gotten to May, we have expenditures that are about $997,000 more than our green budgeted line. However, when we look at the story behind what's causing this, it's a very interesting situation. We actually have identified 5 different areas that add up to $4,762,000 more than budget to date, and yet our actual budget to date offage in expenditures is a little less than $1 million. So when we look at these, we have the treatment court spending, which is about $1,536,000 ahead of budget to date. That project, of course, has been finished and will be reimbursed by ARPA funds. So we don't see this offage continuing. Our next project is about $904,000, and that's ARPA administration and the Silver Springs project, which the county is handling on behalf of Parks. And that, again, will also be reimbursed by ARPA. The next largest item we have is our family courts project, and our spending there is about $869,000 ahead of budget to date, and those funds will be reimbursed by bond draws. So our first three largest items are all going to be expenditures that end up being reimbursed this year. The next largest is about $728,000, and that's jail overtime. We have a much larger population of federal inmates than what we projected having, and so the sheriff is having to pay overtime to his jail staff in order to adequately supervise that population. Fortunately, our federal boarding revenue is also anticipated to be much higher than budget to compensate for this. Our next largest item of the five, number four, this is number five, is actually $725,000, and that's for animal control. And this is just represented by the county actually getting to pay the $450,000 that's been in our budget for a number of years, actually since 2018, to the health department for the new animal shelter that's being built. So while our expenditures are more, the net expenditure is only $997,000 more, and we have plenty of expenditures that are ahead of budget to date based on last year's activity that we know will end up being reimbursed for. So our picture looks fairly good in general revenue right now. To go on to Road and Bridge, when we look at Road and Bridge, we can see the same blue revenue line from 2024, and then our black 2025 budgeted line appears like the total budget for revenues in 2025 does not differ very much from what it was in 2024. And when you look at the activity, you can see that the activity, the gold line, is mirroring right along with those two budgeted lines. In actuality, revenues are about $188,000 ahead of budget. And there's three main accounts. CART funds is $182,000 ahead, and bank interest is $191,000 ahead. Interest on investments is about $141,000 ahead of budget to date. And so those three items make up the main driving items that are ahead of budget, making up for some items that are barely over budget. When we look at expenditures, you'll notice that the mauve 2024 expense line is down here, and that the green budgeted line, while mirroring the shape of it, is much higher up. And that just means that the expenditure budget for 2025 was quite a bit higher than what the actual expenditure spending was in 2024. So to put a number to this, you can see that the expenditures that are budgeted in 2025 are $44,465,000, and the actual expenditures were $11 million, almost $100,000 less than that. And that's why we see this gap. However, when we look at expenditures, you can see that the expenditures are more closely resembling 2024 spend levels than they are the 2025 budget. On expenditures, the main differences that account for this $4,541,000 gap between the green budget line and the blue actual line is a bridge replacement at $3,016,000, contract paving at $734,000, and contract labor at $534,000. We do need to note that bridge replacement and contract labor are both accounts with much larger budgets in 2025 than was in 2024. And so we would expect that spending to probably catch up later in this year. Next, that takes us to the assessment fund. And the assessment fund, like general revenue, the revenues appear to be close to the same as what the actual experience in revenues in 2024 was. There's actually slightly budgeted less revenues in 2025 than what our experience ended up being in 2024. And when you look at the actual line, you can see that revenues are doing better than budget and better than last year. Actually, at this time, revenues are about $101,000 better, and that's mainly attributed to interest on investments being $98,000 higher than budget to date. When we look at the expenditures, you can see the blue actual expenditure line that last month they were slightly over the budgeted amount, but now in May, they are again $185,000 below the budget to date spending on the budget line. And so when we look at this, about 100,000 of that 185,000 is related to personnel savings. And then the other $108,000 that we've identified is in other capital. And so the renovation projects that are going on in the assessor's office are happening at a slower pace than what the renovation projects did last year. That takes us to our final fund, which is law enforcement sales tax. And when we look at law enforcement sales tax, you can see that the revenue budget has increased slightly. The shape has stayed the same from our 2024 revenues. And expenditures has also increased in budget, but keeps the same shape. When we look at revenues, revenues are about $407,000 lower, this gold line, than the black line budget to date for 2025. However, they're actually doing better than our 2024 experience. And when we look at that, it's mainly sales tax is about $382,000 lower than our budget to date. And so we do expect, with what we know about our June receipts, for that to correct itself next month. When we look at expenditures, expenditures are actually a little bit more than what they were in 2024. But when you project the higher 2025 budgeted expenditures against that 2024 experience, we're actually spending about $709,000 less budget to date than what we did last year. And so that $709,000 is primarily personnel, which amounts to $385,000 in savings. In particular, about $238,000 of that is in the prosecuting attorney's office. And then in addition, we have about $349,000 less in spending on municipal distributions, which is the distributions that we give to municipalities of our sales tax that we receive. So since sales tax is lower, our distributions are also lower. So while sales tax will catch up next month, we see these expenditures also catching up next month. And then our final major item of savings is on sheriff vehicles for the jail, or sheriff vehicles. And that spending is about $183,000 less than our budget to date. We, of course, anticipate that spending to catch up later in the year. And so that's really it for our summary of where we currently are with our four major funds. We have a treat for you. The next section of this is going to talk about a specific section, and we put together a presentation for it. However, instead of me presenting it, we've showed it to some podcasters for Google, and we've asked them to give us their interpretation of it. And so we've pre-recorded this, and I'm going to start the recording and then enjoy their podcast. Thanks.
Quite a stack of notes here. Excerpts from the county's Paint by Numbers series.
Yeah, that's the one specifically focusing on pensions and, retirement benefits.
Right. So our goal today is really to unpack these, get a handle on the retirement picture they're painting, look at those questions people always have.
And figure out how the specific county benefits, Social Security, SURF, loggers, how they all, fit together.
Exactly.
But we have to say this right up front. The sources themselves are really clear about this. Retirement is complicated.
Oh, absolutely.
And everything we talk about today is just based on this material we have here. It's definitely not professional financial advice.
No, everyone's situation is so different.
Right. And that's why the notes really stress, go talk to the professionals, the county clerk's office, or attend those loggers and SURF seminars.
Crucial disclaimer. Yeah. So the sources kick off talking about this magic word benefit, something beyond just, job satisfaction.
Yeah, something potentially really significant for your future beyond the day-to-day.
And they put this in context, right? Looking at the whole workforce.
They do. They cite Bureau of Labor Statistics data from 2023. Shows about 56% of all workers, private, state, local, have some kind of workplace retirement plan.
Okay, 56%, so just over half.
But here's the kicker. Only 19% overall are in what we think of as a traditional pension plan.
Wow, okay. And that's where it gets interesting for, say, county employees.
Exactly. The sources highlight that state and local government workers, right, they're only about 13% of the total workforce, but they make up a whopping 52% more than half of all the workers who actually have a pension plan.
That is a huge difference compared to the private sector.
Oh, absolutely. Pensions, they're becoming pretty rare. Lots of plans getting closed or frozen or converted into, different kinds of accounts.
So the fact that these county materials are focused on traditional pensions is pretty notable then.
It really is. It tells you that the benefit structure being discussed here, it's not the norm for most people working today.
Which brings us back to those retirement worries everyone seems to share. Do I actually have enough? Can I really live on just Social Security?
Yeah, or am I going to have to work forever? What if I, outlive my savings? Universal stuff.
Totally. And the sources, they lay out some of the standard advice you hear, right?
Yeah, the general guidelines, aiming to replace about 70% to 80% of your income from before you retired.
Okay, 70 to 80%. And how do they say people usually get there? The standard way?
Well, the typical advice mentioned is saving 10% to 15% of your pre-tax income.
Every year.
Every year, consistently throughout your working life.
And there are those benchmarks, too, like have 6 times your salary saved by 50.
Right, 6 times by 50, 8 times by age 60, that kind of thing. The sources use these as sort of a baseline for comparison later on.
Gotcha. They're setting the stage.
Exactly. Before diving into the county specifics.
Okay, so let's start with the big one. Social Security. Pretty much everyone deals with that. What do the sources tell us?
Well, they clarify the key ages. You can start getting benefits at 62.
But reduced, right?
Permanently reduced, yeah. Then Medicare kicks in at 65. And your full retirement age, when you get 100% of your calculated benefit, well, that's 67 now for anyone born after 1959.
And waiting longer gets you more.
Yep, the sources note that. Waiting past your full retirement age, up to age 70, increases your monthly benefit.
But the really big takeaway from the materials seems to be Social Security was never meant to be your only income source.
Absolutely not. On average, it's projected to replace somewhere around 40% of what you earned before retirement. The presenter in the source even said for them it looked more like 36%.
Okay, 40% or maybe less. What about that worry people have? Is the system going broke? Is it going to be there for us?
Yeah, common question. The sources tackle that directly. They cite the Social Security Board of Trustees estimates.
And what do those say?
They project the trust funds can pay out all the scheduled benefits in full until 2034.
Okay. And what happens in 2034, assuming no changes are made?
Well, according to the estimate in the source, even after that, the system could still pay about 80 cents for every dollar scheduled.
So not zero.
Not zero. That 40% replacement rate we talked about, it would drop to maybe around 32%. So it's a reduction in the projections, not, a total collapse.
Okay, that's important context. Now, how do they actually figure out your benefit amount? The sources say it's complicated.
It is. And the details, like indexing factors and formula endpoints, they change each year. But the core idea, based on the sources, is it uses your average monthly earnings over your highest 35 years of work.
35 years, that's a long time.
It is, and those earnings are adjusted for inflation over time. The formula itself isn't flat. It uses different percentages for different income levels, meaning it's designed to replace a higher percentage of income for people who earned less over their careers and a smaller percentage for higher earners. It's progressive, you could say.
Okay, got it. And how much are we putting into this while we work?
You pay 6.2% of your taxable wages, and your employer matches that another 6.2%.
So 12.4% total.
Right. 12.4% of your earnings over your career going towards funding that, estimated 40% or potentially 32% benefit later on.
And the sources give a really practical tip here.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They strongly recommend getting your annual Social Security statement. Best way now is online.
At the SSA website?
Yeah, ssa.gov.me account. Create an account there.
And why is that statement so valuable?
Because it's yours. It shows your actual earnings history, checks for errors, and gives you personalized estimates. Estimates for retiring at 62, full retirement age 70. It makes it real.
Okay, so that's Social Security, kind of the foundation. Now let's shift gears to the county pensions, SRFs and loggers. The sources say these work pretty differently.
Oh, very differently. Let's start with SURF. Big difference right away. Social Security looks at 35 years. SURF looks at your highest 2 years of earnings.
Just 2 years. Wow. And employees pay into SURF.
Some do. If you were hired after 2002 and you're also covered by loggers, then yes, 4% comes out of your paycheck for SURF.
Okay, and what kind of benefit level is that aiming for?
Well, the sources explain it like this. If your high 2 earnings are over $48,000 and you don't have loggers, the goal is for SURF plus Social Security to hit 72% of those earnings after 25 years of service.
But what if you do have loggers, which many county folks do?
Right. In that case, the SURF part provides 2/3 of that amount because, you're also getting the loggers benefit separately.
Makes sense. Stacks. And how does that SURF benefit build up? Does it grow steadily?
Yeah, it accrues over time based on your years of service, up to 29 years according to the notes. They give percentages. At 15 years, it's 14.9% of that target.
Okay.
At 20 years, 19.8%. 25 years gets you 24.8%, and at 29 years, it maxes out the accrual shown at 27.5%.
All right. Now, what about loggers? How's that one work?
Loggers uses your highest 3 years of earnings, so slightly different from SURF's 2 years.
High 3 instead of high 2.
Got it.
And contributions.
Here's a key point from the sources. The county pays the logger's contribution for you. No employee deduction mentioned specifically for loggers.
Wait, really? So the employee contribution is just the 4% for SURF, if applicable, but loggers is funded by the county.
That's what the materials indicate, yeah. The county covers that cost.
Okay, that's significant. And the calculation, is it simpler than Social Security's?
Oh, much simpler, based on the formula provided. It's just the county's benefit factor, which is 1.5% times your years of service times your high 3 average salary.
So years by 1.5% x high 3 salary. That's your annual loggers benefit.
Pretty straightforward, but there's an important note about the loggers statement you get each year.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
The sources point out that statement only shows your benefit amount calculated as if you retire at age 60.
Which is the earliest you can retire under loggers, but it's a reduced benefit, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So the number on that statement might look lower than what you'd actually get if you work longer, say to 65 or later. Important context when you look at it.
Good tip. Could definitely cause confusion otherwise. And how does the loggers percentage build up with service?
Similar idea to SURF, it grows with time. The source percentages are 15 years gives you 22.5% of your high 3 salary.
Go.
20 years is 30.0%. 25 years gets you 37.5%. And at 29 years, it's 43.5%.
So putting these together, SURF and loggers, they use fewer peak earning years, different contribution models, and multiply your service by a factor of those high earnings. Very different from SS.
Totally different mechanisms. They layer together along with Social Security to build up that overall retirement income picture described in the sources.
Okay, let's try and synthesize this now.
Yeah.
We started with that general advice. Save 10-15% of your income yourself, aim for 70-80% replacement. How do these county benefits stack up against that benchmark according to the sources?
Well, this is really the core message, the magic word benefit hinted at earlier. The sources emphasize that through SURF and loggers, which for many involves just that 4% deduction for SURF, plus the county covering loggers,
Right.
it's potentially possible to reach a retirement income level that's actually better than what you might achieve by saving that 10-15% yourself over your whole career.
Whoa. Okay, so the value being built by the county contributions in the structure could potentially exceed what standard financial advice tells you to save personally.
That's the strong implication from the material, yes. And they highlight what that means now while you're working.
Which is?
It could mean having potentially up to 11% more of your income available to spend today. That's the difference between having to save, say, 15% yourself versus only contributing 4% or less towards these pension benefits being built for you.
So that 11% difference is money you don't have to sock away because the pension system is designed to provide that value.
That's the argument presented in the sources, that extra spendable income while you work while this benefit grows for later.
And critically, this isn't like a 401k balance that you just hope lasts long enough.
Exactly. The sources specifically contrast it. It's not a pot of money you draw down, worrying if it'll run out based on, average life expectancy figures they mention, like 13 years for men, 16 for women after retiring at 67.
No, these are
Lifetime benefits. SURF and loggers, as described, pay out for the rest of your life.
That is a fundamental difference in terms of
It's a
security.
huge difference. It shifts the risk, the longevity risk, away from the individual retiree. It provides income certainty.
And the notes wrap up on a pretty positive message about all this.
They do. They basically say, look, as you're doing your job serving the public, you can have some peace of mind knowing the Khomeini system is working to take care of you throughout your retirement.
And the main worry then becomes,
According to these materials, your biggest retirement worry should just be trying to live as long and healthily as possible to enjoy those benefits.
okay, so quick recap of this deep dive. Sources show Social Security as a base. Then SERF and loggers layer on top, using different calculations, different contributions.
Right. Potentially building a really strong income foundation, maybe even exceeding what typical savings advice suggests is needed from your own pocket.
And this is crucial, just like the sources stress.
Absolutely. While we've unpacked the general picture from these notes, everyone's situation is unique. You really need personalized advice.
So talking to retirement pros, using the county clerk's office resources, going to those SERF and loggers seminars.
Essential, non-negotiable, really, to understand how it all applies specifically to you.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, the listener. Given that these sources paint a picture where county benefits could provide this significant lifetime income stream, maybe even more than you'd build saving 10–15% yourself, does that change how you think about the connection between your work today and your financial future? Does knowing there's a lifetime benefit stream potentially waiting for you influence how you manage your money now or how you plan for, well, living a really long time in retirement?
Yeah, something interesting to consider.
And that's it. I'd like to thank our Google Podcasters for their input and thank everyone for attending. This presentation has been recorded. We're working with Robert Jelly with the Greene County PIO's department, and we'll be uploading this to the county YouTube site. You'll be able to find the link for this by going to the Budget Office's webpage, and under Forms, you'll see Paint by Numbers. And if you click on that Paint by Number link, it'll open a PDF that has our meetings and then the actual link provided. So once we get this uploaded and I get the link, we'll put this out on the webpage, and then we'll also send an email to office holders and department heads, letting them know that it's available so that they can choose to share that with the employees. Again, thank you all for attending. We appreciate it.